Good evening and welcome to the Planning Commission meeting. We will get started with our call to order and start off with our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you very much. And first up is our consent item, draft meeting minutes for November 25th. We will have to punt that adoption of the draft meeting minutes due to not enough votes. Next up is citizen input on non-agenda items. Do we have any citizen input?
We do not.
We do not. Okay, so I won't go through the whole litany there. No old business, no new business, no public hearings. That takes us to our work session, and the purpose of tonight's work session is to give the Planning Commission the opportunity to discuss fence code revisions. To make the most of the short time we're given for these work sessions, public comment will not be taken. Instead, we invite the public comment at all of the Planning Commission's regular meetings under either of the two opportunities dedicated on each agenda for public comment. In addition, we invite the public to contact city staff with comments or concerns. Although this is a public meeting, the Planning Commission cannot make any formal decision in a work session. Next step actions are often determined for deliberation and discussion at a properly noticed Planning Commission hearing. And with that, we will discuss fence code revisions as presented by Mr. Ryan Potter, our planning manager. Staff will lead a sixth and last work session related to the city's fence code. Mr. Potter.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the Planning Commission. Tonight, we're going to talk about fence standards for the last time in a work session, unless more work sessions are requested. The goal is to just kind of go over the staff draft edits for how to modify our current fence code provisions, and then basically just set us up for bringing this back to you as a formal text amendment. So tonight is just a work session, so there's no voting on it. It would just come back potentially very similar to how it is now, but, you know, depending on our discussion tonight, but then ultimately it'll go to you for a recommendation and then on to City Council for adoption. So where am I here? So as I said, this is the sixth work session. We've had five before. I'm not going to go through all these, but we've talked about, why are we doing this? Examples of fences that are out of compliance. We've talked about other jurisdictions. We've looked at diagrams and 3D models, and then we've discussed a lot of specific conditions, either on corner lots, and then later we talked about non-standard conditions next to paths or streets. So the rest of this presentation is really the exact content that was in your packet. So there's nothing new here. I just carved it up into pieces in case anyone wanted to discuss them. So I guess feel free to stop me, but I'll just kind of breeze through these one by one, just a high level summary, and just let me know if you want to stop and talk. So the first thing right up front, I added a purpose statement, and this is consistent with what we've talked about, balancing privacy, which is what a lot of people thought the fence code was lacking, with safety and aesthetic considerations. So we just wanted to add that up front to establish what this part of the code is for. The next provision is new, but it's sort of moved from elsewhere, and this was something that we heard a lot from the Planning Commission about, which is vision clearance. So this was moved to the top, and then it's meant to very clearly, it says, this applies in all zones and in all lot configurations. And what we had heard from the Planning Commission was vision clearance is important at street intersections, but also alleys and paths, and everything else. So we just wanted to emphasize how important that was. The B, this was an existing provision that just kind of got wordsmithed, but this is for normal residential lots, not corner lots. And we just cleaned it up and then took out the vision clearance part because that was moved to the front. Corner lots, this is really the main impetus for this whole set of changes. You know, we've been here for years that corner lots, people couldn't really box in their backyards. They wanted their 6-foot fences to wrap around so that they could fully box in the back, even when it was along a side street. And so that's what this is meant to allow and be clearer. It's funny when you start writing these, it still seems wordy, but then it's hard to not cover all the bases if it doesn't get a little wordy. It's on purpose, and that's just part of the deal. But this was to allow what people had been asking for, and we had heard from the Planning Commission. It seemed like there was consensus that we would be more permissive. And then, like the provision says in its reworded format, it still has to step down to the 3.5 feet once you get into the front setback. So even if you have 6 foot along the interior side, along the back, and then wrapping around on the side street, it still has to come down once you get to that front setback. And that's for aesthetic reasons, safety reasons, and vision clearance.
Did we skip B?
Yeah, B was the one for normal residential lots. The letters are a little weird because A is new, and so it kind of shifts the numbering or the lettering.
Okay, because something I have a question about, and we can get through them and I can circle back to it, is I don't fully understand how some of these are applying to the vision clearance on corners and where the alleys are and stuff. Like, because we're saying you can wrap around in certain instances after saying you're not going to if it's going to impede vision. So I'm a little confused on some of them.
Okay. Do you want to talk about it now, or do you want to circle back to it?
Whatever you guys want to do.
Let's crush it now.
Yep.
Okay.
I think he clarifies corner lots specifically in C.
And yeah, so the idea is vision clearance applies no matter what. And so when you get to a corner lot, the higher fence can wrap around more, but it's still going to have to come down to 2.5 feet in the vision triangle, and that overlaps with where it's already having to come down to 3 feet. Okay. And in a lot of cases, for a lot of intersections, that vision clearance isn't ever going to even encroach into your yard. It just depends on the street.
Ryan, if
Go.
I could just maybe interject real quick.
Sure.
I think the other possibility would be you may not have a 90-degree angle fence. So in other words, instead of stepping it down, you would stay within the setback and you just clip the corner. Mm-hmm. And you see that as well. That's just another add to that piece.
Okay. So on revised section B, we've got a double strike through the provided, however, that in no case shall a fence be constructed in violation of the requirements of the vision clearance area. What made us want to take that out?
My idea was that we've already established in the previous one that it applies no matter what. So I'm wondering, could the new section A say this applies in all zones and in all lot configurations and supersedes any fence requirements or fence minimums? So is that,
We could put a pin in it and circle back to it once
Okay.
we get through the others.
let me make a note. I think, so part of the idea was, why does B talk about vision clearance, and then there's a bunch of other provisions that don't. And so it makes sense to either have something at the beginning that says that it supersedes everything, or add something about vision clearance in every single one. You know what I mean?
Or if A says new A, maybe after its second sentence, this applies in all zones and in all lot configurations, including everything below.
Yeah.
You know, something that kind of.
Sure. Okay.
And then I think that would probably cover it pretty well.
Okay, I think that makes sense. Corner lots. The next one was through lots. I personally don't like the term through lot. That's something that's already defined elsewhere in our code, so we kind of carried that through here. But this is the idea that there's a lot of yards that do back up against a street. You know, think about Ivy or Territorial or places like that where you're at the edge of a subdivision, North Holly. And this is just memorializing what people were already doing, which is putting a 6-foot fence along their backyard. And then the second one, this was always an odd one to me, and I don't know that we really talked about it before, but the existing code says no more than one row of fencing is allowed within a required street yard setback. I know several examples in town where someone has the 6-foot fence farther back, but then they have a little decorative fence in front that gives it sort of a layered look. The difficulty with a provision like this is, you know, staff doesn't know why it was put into place. I'm sort of neutral about it, but I could see actually taking it out unless we had a reason why we didn't want double fences.
I can see where sometimes you have neighbors who they've got their fence and then the neighbor behind them has their fence. So
Yeah.
they're basically two up against one another, so they each have their fence that they're responsible for, and it's the way that they want it. I don't know that there's tons of instances of that, and I don't know how much we feel like we need to be regulating on it. Because the other quick question I had is, I mean, we're really talking about new construction for most of these, right? Because there's unlikely to be a lot of enforcement of existing or newly built in existing neighborhood fencing.
I mean, people do come to us and ask what they can and can't do. So, I mean, there's always going to be a lot of fences around town that are grandfathered in that aren't going to be touched and, you know, maybe are out of compliance with both versions of the code. But we do get fences.
We've got the good
yeah.
citizens who ask before they build
Yeah.
instead of just doing whatever. Okay. I don't think it hurts anything for E to be in there, but I don't have any special affinity for it.
I think we should take it out. I mean, the way I read it is that you can't have 2 rows of fencing within a yard setback.
Which would
That's
all
like
be on
within
one
one person's yard.
Yeah.
Not that, I know what you're saying,
Yeah.
but that's not what this says.
Yeah.
And who does that? I mean, what a maintenance nightmare. I
honestly
mean,
don't
maybe
know.
somebody buys a house and they want to tear down the old fence and they just put one, but I say strike it,
Yeah,
if you're okay.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we
Craig and Hannah, do you guys have
that's
any
necessary.
strong feelings? Or not strong feelings? Any feelings? Okay.
I say strike it.
Cool. I will make note of that. The next slide is mitigation fences. So this one had talked about planning commission may require site blocking or noise mitigating fences for any development or reviews. It was staff's position to keep that, but for more legal defensibility, to just establish that the point of that is to mitigate something specific, whether it's a noise issue or a safety issue, not just because someone thinks that it would look better. So staff thought that added clarity and purpose to that provision.
So we can't comment on the aesthetic value of putting something like, if we're going to have, say, manufacturing close to residential in some way where it actually would be of value to the people who live nearby to not have to see the inner workings of the industrial whatever next door. I mean, it
Yeah.
seems like there might be instances where we would want to be able to say something if that's not running afoul of the Oregon rules.
I mean, I think land use compatibility kind of is an adverse impact depending on the situation, which is why I tried to word it this particular way, a specific adverse impact. So in your example, I almost think you could still use this, but I mean, I'm open.
I agree. I think the commercial and industrial, they're not subject to the provisions that residential is, so they are still discretionary in that sense. So now, whether that's a staff level decision or planning commission level decision, if there's a conditional use permit or variance with those projects, I think that does have some bearing on the application. So I think obviously, if you're going to go to the extent of putting mitigation fencing in, you would want to do it in a way that, because it's going to be more expensive, that look good as well.
So something outside of residential, are they going to be subject to this Chapter 16 fencing code, or is this going to be more specific to?
Yeah, in fact, the next provision, G on the screen there,
Yeah, C&M.
deals with non-residential, so yes.
Okay. I think it might not hurt to build in some degree of leeway for aesthetic concerns where it comes to, maybe even if we just say when it comes to two different types of zones that abut one another, so that it's not just turning into an aesthetic fight within residential development, but we are giving a clear path to support residents who are going to be living next to something they're going to be not happy about in the first place.
Would we extend the 8-foot to those boundary zones? Because you can, that's what G is about, is allowing 8-foot height. And so if you're on the commercial side of that, then you're allowed to have an 8-foot high fence that separates you from residential. But if you're on the residential side of that,
You're still only allowed to have 6.
Just curious.
We had something come up in the past with a development, housing development that was, I won't say specifically, but 13th and Sequoia area, and they were worried about seeing trains. So, but that was across the street, so it wasn't abutting it.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it's something to think about. They had reasons, that I wouldn't say they were all aesthetic. They had valid concerns about it, but anyway, it was the neighborhood that brought that up.
Yeah, I think at the staff level, I think we can look at wordsmithing that to address the points that you're making up.
Okay, yeah. So for F, we can consider aesthetics when it is residential against some other zone. And to Commissioner Hutchinson's comment for G, I do think we should allow anybody who's abutting any of the commercial or industrial zones to be able to do an 8-foot buffer. Because if you're the end of the line with the residential, there's no reason you need a 6-foot fence. Right?
I have to see it. It's hard for me to envision what you're talking about.
Well, if it still says are permitted, that's the wiggle room, right?
Yeah.
But, they could ask for it if they want it, and if they want to do standard 6, they could. But
A residential.
that residential, only when they're next to abutting.
If you're up against the highway or up against
Yeah.
industrial.
Okay.
And I mean, I don't know if we would have to clearly define abuts or if there'd be a little bit of flexibility in it. But I think of like 13th and I think it's Sequoia. There's the residences that are like right there on the west side of the street, and on the east side of the street is that big steel manufacturing. I mean, they didn't see that coming, and it's big and it's loud and it's ugly, and I'm sure a lot of them wish their fences were a little bit higher. So I mean, that would be a situation where, maybe
So in that case, you're advocating for the residential to be
able
8-foot
to
fence.
block what they have, to have to see the industry beyond them a little bit.
Or just
Or even
match the standard of the other side of the property line.
Yeah.
Is kind of what I'm thinking about. So it's like you're giving the industrial people an opportunity to build a different fence than the people who are just on the other side of that same boundary.
And in my example, there is a road between them, and that's where I'm not sure if abuts would just be, there is like the division line between, on this side of the street, it's residential, and on the other side of the street, it's industrial or commercial or whatnot. But like I would say, for those people in the residential developments and the sides of their yards that are facing Sequoia and have that building beyond them, like, to me, they should be able to have an 8-foot fence if they want in their backyard, just so there's just less of it across from them.
It sounds like
Sorry, just really quick. Will everyone remember to turn their mic on? I'm hearing most of you most of the time, but not all the time.
I'm actually wondering if maybe we could have an additional, I mean, I think we should still keep this one, but have an additional provision about land use compatibility, or, land use, different land uses side by side, and address that specifically.
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
Yeah, if you look at Sequoia, a lot of those people are growing cypress trees anyway, so they have their 6 foot and then they've got another, 5 feet.
Well, if I saw that being built, the first thing I would have done was get whatever I could that's going to grow the tallest.
Cool. Okay, the next one was the one about C2, CM, M1, and M2. This is highway, commercial, and the industrial zones. And we had taken out the PUD part of that list, because PUDs, at least in my experience, and especially in Canby, are usually residential, and fences up to 8 feet in height, staff's position was that was not consistent with the rest of the code, which we were saying 6 feet was appropriate for residential areas. But PUDs go to the planning commission and their own special thing already. And so we thought that was fine, because a PUD could propose a special fence within their PUD application, and it would be going to planning commission, where you could discuss that specific situation, and in as part of that approval, without doing a blanket category in this section G. So if everyone's okay with that.
Standard 6 foot for PUD seems really reasonable.
Okay. This one, this is fences along paths, and so we tried to make this more concise. We had received a lot of feedback that this was overly complicated. It got into materials and other things, so we simplified it. It is more permissive than it was before, and this is partially based on the discussion that we had with this body about basically allowing what most people were doing anyway along paths when they cut through neighborhoods, which is still allowing people to do 6 foot fences along their side and backyards, and then having to step down in the front setback, just like corner lots and the other lots that we talked about. So it would kind of enshrine being able to do the whole higher in the back, lower in the front, step down that is required elsewhere. And then the only exception to that is the industrial zone, C2 and the industrial zones, where they're allowed to have 8 foot fences. And the other thing about those zones is a lot of times there is no front setback. And so there is no standard that everything has to step down. And so basically it's worded right now, in those zones, private fences along public pedestrian pathways may be constructed up to 8 feet, but may not conflict with vision clearance requirements. And that's basically saying they can be 8 feet unless they're an issue up in the front along the street. But I could also see where you could just attach a specific number of feet if we were thinking paths in those areas should step down.
So that was something I had a question about from the first one, because we're talking about vision clearance, which is in the triangle, which is all very important.
Right.
But I don't think it's concrete, right? If I am a person in my neighborhood and I'm just trying to build a new fence and I want to make sure I'm on the up and up, you're talking to me about vision triangles and clearances, but I'm not going to have a traffic study done. So how far back do I need to go? So can we provide a standard number? Is it 20 feet or something else that would clear pretty much anything but the most special of circumstances that we would want to review individually, where we say X amount of feet back, and then that should give a triangle for whatever.
Yeah, that's something we've always struggled with, because there's streets that don't have sidewalk and the planter strip, and so 20 feet on a street with none of that versus 20 feet on a street with that stuff, the vision clearance looks a lot different. And so it's really, I think we all struggle with how to address that uniformly.
Could we maybe make some kind of little reference table that says if your street is X wide, does have a sidewalk, then it needs to be this far back. If your street is this wide and it does not have a sidewalk, then it needs to be this far back. You know, just something that has those basic criteria. You look at it in a little kind of bar chart, not a bar chart, but like just a little, a table instead of the first time. Stick with the table.
And would that allow you to bring up the fence that far, or would at full height, or would that be where it has to step down?
I'm thinking that we need to be extra clear about where the fence needs to stop. Because that's the thing that I think would confuse the most people, is how far out can I build my fence? And then if we have guidance that's saying it needs to step down, cool. I mean, are we going to step down and then stop? Or are we just going to step down a certain amount back? Because it doesn't seem to me like we're saying you can't have anything at all. We're just saying like 2.5 feet or something is a minimum. Am I remembering that
Right, because that's.
we never say no fence at all. We say it has to be lower. So I guess we
Right.
would just want to give them a clear calculation of how far back away from the sidewalk or the road or whatever we're telling them to measure from, it needs to be at the lowest level. And then they can do whatever they want in between.
And I was just going to add, I think if the table became really challenging, I'm just visualizing a ton of possible options, maybe graphics, Ryan. I'm not sure if we could do a couple graphics that would say, and these would not necessarily be all inclusive, but maybe a few graphics that would be,
Sure,
as example, saying this may not cover all cases. I'm just concerned that
I
it
don't
may
want
be
it
a
to balloon
never-ending
on you
table.
guys.
Yeah, it's just.
I'm just thinking, like, if somebody comes to you and says, how do I have the vision clearance necessary? Like, is there a way to give them a simple answer up front?
Yeah.
Or do we have to look at them individually and advise them individually?
sure.
And do you guys have the resources to advise them and figure it out without traffic studies and stuff?
I think it's fairly simple usually if they come in. I mean, this is one of the more easy parts of it. I mean, unless there's an odd angle, I think it's pretty straightforward. I mean, really the objective is to see over it when you're driving in a car. That's the whole objective of the 3.5 feet. It's so you can see over it. Yeah.
Yeah, so that one, I think when we bring this back, we'll take a shot at rewording that to address those comments.
Fantastic, thank you.
Let's see. Hazardous materials, we took out a piece of this that had to do with livestock. The city doesn't have any zones that allow that type of land use, so we didn't think that applied, so we took it out. We had never talked about arbor specifically. We had always talked about the fence parts of the code, but the arbor section is right after it, so I decided to just lump that in with the rest. And here we didn't have any edits necessarily, but there was this one, number one, arbors shall be standalone structures and shall not be attached to a fence. I think that's a little weird. I don't know why you wouldn't be able to have an arbor attached to a fence. I feel like if it meets all the other height restrictions, I don't see why it matters. So I was kind of leaning towards taking that out, but was hoping to get everyone else's opinion.
I would totally support that. I think that is more of a CCNR element versus a zoning issue. If that subdivision really has specific concerns about that kind of thing, I think that should be really a private matter. I just don't see that we want to get into a serious level of code enforcement over arbors and fences, which this will lead to.
Yeah. And this whole chapter is not, it's not meaning to legislate taste. And this is one of those things where it seems to be encroaching on preference on taste.
So maybe the reason that it was saying it can't be attached to the fence is because it was supposed to be trying to make the argument that if you're using trees as a fence, it has to be in a little bit from the fence itself. Because I mean, lots of people use trees that are going to grow higher than 6 foot for additional screening. And that's essentially what we're talking about with this arbor's clause, right?
Yeah, so one of the things I thought of, and so this is where I struggle, is because I know that I've seen houses, not necessarily in Canby, but where the fence is really low all along the front, but right where the path is from the sidewalk that heads to your front door, there's just a very compact little arch. And is that an arbor? And based on our code, would that violate our height
What about if
requirements?
you're putting a 2-foot arbor on top of a 6-foot fence, and then it gets, I mean, is that maybe why they were kept separate? Because, you know, if you're.
Like creating additional height?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the challenge really is this is an evolving situation on private property, not in the public realm. So this is to that point, a good point. But let's say they put the fence in and then they put the arbor in. I mean, this is like, are we going to regulate on-site private property vegetation? That just seems crazy to me that we would go down to that level of review. I mean, that again is about CCNRs, it's a neighborhood, unless it creates some sort of public health and safety issue, it feels beyond the scope of what we should be looking at as a city.
So that does lead to my question, which is going to be corner lots that do have vegetation that clearly blocks that triangle. And there are quite a few.
Quite a few.
And I think those are probably an exception.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, so it's not to say that we wouldn't take action on those. It's just like somebody that has vegetation growing into a sidewalk.
Yeah.
Same situation, and we've actually taken action in that situation. No, sorry, you can't put your arbors out into the sidewalk. There's ADA, somebody could trip over at night. There's all kinds of issues that can happen. And so that's a bit different, I think, when it starts to go into that's more the public realm at that point where you have the vision clearance issue.
And that leads into the very next provision, which said, before I struck it out, which was, if the vegetation becomes too full or too high, and those are undefined, the owner is financially responsible to rectify the situation and to maintain the vegetation and arbor. And my response to that was, we removed this because it's too vague and unenforceable. There's no definition given for too full or too high. That's maybe one of those vague things I've ever seen in a code. And city management of vegetation, which changes over time, is not something the city really has resources available for micromanaging it in general. But there are provisions elsewhere in the code about vision clearance and then hazards in the public right of way. And that's the part that Dawn was getting about. If there's vegetation in the public right of way, then our code enforcement officer, and she's actually done a few of these lately, has written them a letter and they've rectified it. So I took that out because I thought it was getting a little too mixing
As it's
things.
written, yeah, I agree. But if it is written specifically with the provision that it doesn't block field of view or the view triangle, then I think it should stay. Unless you feel that it's covered fine elsewhere in the code and we can just punt and not worry about it.
Well, part of the problem is this is still in the arbor section, which is a weird place for it to me. I feel like if we were going to do that and keep this and clarify it, it should be moved maybe up to the front.
Yep.
Where we're talking about conditions that apply everywhere.
Yep. Agreed.
So maybe, I mean, but I think it's in our nuisance code too, so we'll have to look how those two things interrelate.
Yeah, do we even necessarily need an arbor's code? Because the only thing it seems to really be stating is that it's not supposed to be more than 8 feet tall and 5 feet back from the property line. Which is important, I think, from the 5 foot back from the property line part, the 8 foot in height, I don't see anybody ever enforcing that, right?
I
So,
haven't seen
I
that.
think we're talking about a structure that things grow on as opposed to the trees themselves.
okay, so that's
Yeah.
the clarified part. Okay, so this is when somebody builds like a pergola kind of situation? Okay.
I have a question on number 2. So I can't, I'm sure we've talked about this, but let's say somebody puts up a little picket fence. That has to have a 5-foot setback, a picket fence in a front yard?
Well, I mean, this is saying that an arbor is a very specific thing
Yeah.
versus a fence.
But what I'm thinking about is people that have a picket fence and then they have an arbor where the gate is.
Right.
Which is kind of a common, I mean, you know, people like that, like a little entryway. That wouldn't have a 5-foot setback. Right.
Right.
That's correct.
So should we write something that specifically allows that, and how do we confine that so that it's not creating a extra high fence along the whole frontage of a street?
Yeah, I can't imagine somebody creating a big arbor that's out in front of a big fence. It just doesn't, I've never seen anything like that, so I don't think we need to.
We could just strike the whole arbor section and just address vegetation in the view triangle.
Okay.
Unless you guys think it needs to stay.
No, that's what I was saying. I'm not sure that it does, because no one's really going to enforce the height, and I think the only thing we really need to make sure is that there's a 5-foot setback where there needs to be one, and that might be able to be addressed in other places.
If it makes anybody feel any better, I spent a lot of time this winter using artificial intelligence tools, and so I asked 5 different tools to give a fence code, and none of them mentioned arbors. Well, that's AI, but still.
And you didn't send it to me so that I could
should
use
have,
it?
I haven't. Yours is better, but I should have.
Yeah.
Actually, it was not bad, but yours was better. But none of them mentioned arbors, and I tried 5 different tools.
Okay, well, we'll try to shift what we want out of the hidden meaning in this to somewhere else so that it works better.
I think part of the reason this came up was we had a specific individual that on Holly that has a fence and then an arbor all along, which actually looks pretty nice, but it was a specific individual.
And was it getting in the way of like the sidewalk and people going by?
No, it just was a violation. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so we talked about that.
And it looks beautiful.
Well, I was going to say, I don't even think having it up near the road is necessarily a problem, as long as people can see and people can use the sidewalk. If you want to have some pretty bushes on the edge of your property, have at it, you know, but that's just my 2 cents.
The very last thing I have for you is not something that's in that fence code in chapter, whatever that main chapter is. This is in the industrial park overlay, and this is about requiring screening with 6-foot site obscuring fence or hedge type vegetation for open storage and laydown yards. I was not proposing any changes to this because I thought this was something that actually comes up quite a bit and that we do want those things screened. So if anyone has any thoughts otherwise.
Only would 8 be better?
Storage or lay down yards.
But we already provisioned that 8 is allowed, right?
Can be up to
Up to
8 in general.
That would be in the instances where we are going to see it and we can say something about it. But it wouldn't be awful for it to be a default that they have to put in the 8.
From I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. From the industrials that we've reviewed, they typically talk about, having a privacy fence and my perspective is they've all worked hard to try to be good neighbors. And we haven't brought up height, but, they put in beautiful, planting and foliage and everything. I don't think it's been a big issue.
Well, if I remember right too, they like to berm.
Yeah,
And then they
right.
fence on top of the
Right.
berm. And so you've got, all in,
Yeah.
you're probably
Yeah.
14 feet.
Yeah.
From
Yeah, I think this one is less about what you can or could do, and this is more like a requirement.
Yeah.
If you're having a big,
baseline.
ugly lay-down yard, then you need something around it.
And that's where I was saying, maybe we ask them, do we just say it has to be taller to begin with? Because is there any downside to it being taller? Because if they don't have that berm, and if it really is going to be more or less at ground level up, then 6 foot doesn't seem like very much for an industrial situation. And to them, they're spending millions upon millions of dollars. The little bit of the increase in the fence project probably won't break them, but it might make the neighbors a lot happier.
I'm kind of agnostic either way. I could go either way.
Well, if it was lumber, it could still be taller than 8 feet.
Sure.
Semi-trucks are still taller. So I am as well.
8 feet, is that the consensus, or no, 6 foot? Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I agree. When you go by the industrials, all their big equipment and everything is way, way higher than 8 feet.
So that is all I had, except for to say that staff will bring a formal text amendment to the planning commission once we take in the input from tonight and make some final edits. And then obviously you'll get to review it again, but there's extra noticing, and then the public will have a chance to comment on it in that hearing at the planning commission, and then it'll go to city council for adoption. What I forgot to mention here is we will also be bringing the draft code revisions to our council, our city attorney, and so they'll be looking at it through their own lens to make sure whatever we're proposing is legally defensible. In fact, we'll do that before it comes back to you, and then we'll note if our legal counsel said anything that modified what we had talked about.
Can't believe it. We're almost across the finish line.
I just have one more quick thing, and it came out of this AI stuff I was doing, and I can't remember, so definitions, like in this, we had a definition of arbor, but do we want a definition of height, that is from the ground to the top? And that came up because there's some properties that have like a height difference, so, if there's like a step down from one lot to the next, an elevation step down, so do we need a definition for height and the one vertical distance from the ground to the top of the fence? And I know we define setback probably in other places, but do we need that here? The distance between the fence and the property line, is that the setback definition here?
I think it's defined in the beginning of the
Okay,
code.
that's what I thought.
But the other thing that you mentioned actually has been an issue, and you know what, I didn't think of it, and I think we should define that. Because we've had some fences proposed or a neighbor has complained where they had like a retaining wall, and then they wanted to put a 6 fence on top of that, and it's really like 10 feet. And so maybe adding a little definition so that it's clearer, I think is a good idea.
And there was one other that just kind of stuck out at me. It said, all fences must be constructed with durable materials and maintained in good condition. And that's so generic, but it's sort of a purpose statement too. Something to think about. Anyway, that's it for me.
So how, just out of curiosity, how would you word that? Are you going to make reference to a certain grade? So you have like a finish grade or a rough grade, or how? I mean, how would you, because I can see where, hey, if I just build this dirt mound up really, really high, I can put a 6-foot fence on that. So how do you call that out?
I think we'll probably have to look at how other cities have done that. I don't know if like right off my head, I would know how I would word it.
Okay.
Everything I saw just said from the ground to the top of the fence. It didn't define ground
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll take a look at that if that's okay, and then we'll
Yeah,
bring
sure.
final language back to you. So you said durable materials and maintained in good
good condition.
condition.
So the durable materials and maintained in good condition.
No tarps.
So when we allow multifamily projects to be put in residential areas, I've got a couple near me. They put up a fence, they do a crappy job of it, and then it's falling down, and nobody's responsible for coming back and fixing it. And I'm concerned about that just being a growing issue in other areas. The vinyl plastic fence where you just use wooden posts, and then there's basically like plastic vinyl that looks like wood when it's first brand new. When they're new, they look nice, but they don't hold up to like the UV rays, the changing of the weather, to things hitting them. They crack, they fall apart, and then it's pretty much two posts with some cracked vinyl-y looking stuff. And it definitely does not meet, I don't think, anybody's definition of aesthetically pleasing. And then even with wood fences, if they put in a wood fence and it's not treated at all, then it just looks like aging wood and also not particularly attractive. So we might want to do a little,
Does that cross over?
I think
Right, 'cause
it
that
gets a little
feels like it
slippery
does.
slope-ish when you
Yeah.
start talking about which materials, and then, yeah.
I guess it's the
I do what you
maintenance
mean, I
piece.
do know what you mean, though.
But it's the
Yeah.
maintenance piece, right? Because
Yeah.
a builder builds it and then they sell it to somebody and then they're like, well, we don't have anything to do with it anymore. Somebody else owns it. But then there's not a lot of follow-up on it because if it's not immediately on the city street, we had to build a path back to it, which is happening with a lot of projects that we've seen in the recent, the last 2 years so I've been around. Then it's like, it's not a road, so the city doesn't have to maintain it. It's pretty much just a driveway to a multifamily building that some
Can
property
we
manager
legislate
places.
maintenance and upkeep?
Right.
Yeah.
That's
That's
why
the
the ones
question.
I saw online just kind of was generic. They must be constructed with durable materials and maintained in good condition. Is that enforceable? No, but let's get it in there. Yeah.
If it creates a safety issue, I think
yeah.
for sure.
That would fall under code enforcement, right? That
Yeah.
she could address that if it's fallen over into the
Yeah, but I
somebody's yard
mean,
or somebody's
there's-
sidewalk.
Plastic
I haven't
bags.
really seen a whole lot of that. I just see a lot of degrading fences on driveways leading into back lots. And it's just, I've got a neighbor next to me who has a driveway back to apartments next to them. And it's the apartment's fence. They use one of those vinyl ones that cracks and falls apart. And it's not really their fence. And the people who own it are like, nope, we're not going to do anything about it. We don't have to, we won't. And so then it's like, okay, well, so I guess I'm going to have to build my own fence inside of that, where there's two fences next to one another so that their dogs are safely contained. And it's just kind of silly to have so much fencing going on. And I don't know, you can't really legislate being a good neighbor, but that is really the root of the problem.
Indeed. It's in poor taste, but anyway. Okay, so do you have more on that? Ryan?
I don't have anything else, but this was really great feedback, so I appreciate everyone's comments.
Okay, items of interest from planning staff.
Just have a few items that I was going to mention. This kind of leads into schedule a bit as well. This summer, we'll be seeking input from the Planning Commission on the comprehensive plan work that we're doing. That's for the current city limits and the current urban growth boundary. And we're diving into policies and goals that are reflective of the community process to date, the project advisory committee work that's been done to date, staff and consultant work. We're struggling a bit with how to present all this because there's a lot of material that will be coming forth to you all for recommendation to the city council. I was going to suggest that I have a work session this summer to kind of go through and maybe address that a bit more in terms of what we're talking about. It's really, I think, the intention for our purposes, we'd like to have the planning commission focus on, are there things that we're missing from what should be in the comprehensive plan versus like redrafting items that have been vetted through the community process already and the project advisory committee process. Just a bit of a foretaste to this, there would be everything from, memorialization of the vision and process that's been done to date, citizen involvement that's been done to date, and then the chapters are land use, natural resources, air, water, and land resource quality, areas subject to natural hazards, parks and recreation, economic development, housing, public facilities and services, transportation, energy conservation, and urbanization. And so this document will be rather substantial. I'd like to focus really more on the high-level policy levels versus the detailed text items, but just to maybe go through and identify what we heard, from this process so far. And ultimately, we will be seeking a recommendation from you all, and that will be happening between now and probably the fall. And then as we go into this, we'll be going into hearings in the fall through the beginning of winter to seek adoption for the comp plan. So that's a bit of just a foretaste of what's coming.
Can I add something?
Please.
I was going to say that there's a few of those. If it seems like we've recently done reports like the Parks and Recreation Master Plan or the Historic Resources Plan, the comp plan won't be reinventing the wheel. Those documents that have been recently adopted by you guys and council will be folded into the comprehensive plan and the goals and policies.
Yeah, and that's just, and part of that is we will be, thank you, Ryan. For historic preservation, the chapter would be rather small, and we'd adopt by reference the historic preservation plan, for example. We'd pull out the policies of that that's already been adopted by resolution, but this will be baked into the comp plan as part of the ordinance. So just wanting to kind of let you know what's happening there. We're also taking a pause a bit to really focus on the comp plan and getting that completed. We are running the urban growth boundary together with this, the expansion of the urban growth boundary, but that's going to pick back up the beginning of the year 26. There's just enough stuff that we're working on right now on various parts of this we really need to concentrate on getting this part done first, and then the urban growth boundary process would start later. So what you would all see would be a work session going through a bit of this, give you a better context of this. We'd have a project advisory committee meeting anticipated in August, along with the community summit. That would be the next round here. We'd be then going into essentially planning commission, city council work sessions, hearings through the end of the year, and then we'd start back with urban growth boundary with another community summit and another project advisory committee meeting sometime at the beginning of next year. Commissioner Llewellyn, still trying to make a time that we can get together on, I know you've had some commentary on, especially on the UGB, and would love to get your comments separately on that. So that's maybe just a bit of what we're doing, just bit longer term. Near term, we don't have a lot of upcoming hearings that we have where we have hearing items or work session items. The comp plan is kind of our major focus, but we are working on a number of city council initiatives. We have a May 21st Parks Urban Growth Boundary discussion on May 21st. June 4th, we'll be talking with the council on system development charges, which is also kind of a parallel process. Hopefully July 16th, historic preservation with council. And then we have this floodplain process that we have to address based on the biological opinion from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which all the cities in Oregon are having to address and basically reestablish a floodplain, renew their floodplain ordinance consistent with biological assessment provisions. You all will be seeing that as well. I'm hoping you'll see that on August 11th at work session. But between now and so we've got April 28th, which would be the next planning commission, and then May 12th. And then there's May 26th, which is actually Memorial Day, which falls on that meeting date. Those three at this point look like we don't really have any items at all for a hearing or work session. It's the April 28th, May 12th, and May 26th. But we will have a June 9th. If we didn't have the 26th of Memorial Day, Ryan would be back for the fence code, but the fence code will be June 9th. Then I'm hoping on June 23rd and July 14th, we'll have work sessions around the comp plan. So there'll be a bit of a hiatus here for about three of these meetings. I can send this out. I know I'm
Yeah.
sending a lot of information to you. But so there's the next three PC meetings, we will not need to have those because there's really don't have anything to discuss. June 9th, fence code. June 23rd, comp plan, July 14th, comp plan, and we'll figure out on the 28th what's going on there. August 11th, floodplain. So there's some, I'll send out an email to everybody.
And will those be advanced docs for us to review, or are they going to be just presented at the work session?
The comp plan, well, the fence code will be advanced because that's going to be an ordinance. So you'll see that in advance. You'll get 10 days in advance of that. That'll be the full code, which Ryan just went through tonight. The work sessions will be more like a PowerPoint and really kind of just catching you all up and wanting to get your input on that. That won't be, I'm not asking for a decision necessarily, just direction on those. The floodplain, you will see some information in advance as well on that for the August 11th. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the background, and we're just trying to continue to move it forward. Part of this is, part of the items on the growth boundary is how much parkland are we going to be requesting? That question's still not been answered, and that's going to be discussed with council on May 21st. And that's again, kind of why we're separating these a bit, but we do need to adopt the comp plan and the TSP, Transportation System Plan first, get that completed and targeting end of year for that, and then continuing with the urban growth boundary expansion.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Is there a definitional difference between parkland and open space?
There is, in terms of, they can be similar. Parkland is typically something that is more active than open space. And I think we're focusing more on active space. Brian, I don't know if you have any.
Does that include a golf course?
Well, not necessarily private parkland. This would be public. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Okay.
Brian, any thoughts? Okay. And other questions? So this is just kind of to give you a heads up, and I'll send out a full update of all these dates that I just threw out to you all.
Hey, Don.
Yeah.
I promised I'd get back to you. I'm on my way back to Oregon as we speak, so I'll get back to you. We'll find a time. But one of the things I think we should be looking at is pulling out the industrial area master plan and reviewing that when we're doing this.
For Pioneer Industrial Park.
Yeah, I think that should be looked at to be expanded with the growth boundary.
And we will absolutely look into that. So that's good point. And Craig, are there specifics? We can talk more in detail, but anything in specific that you have about the focus we should have on that?
Yeah, but it would take another hour.
Okay.
We'll sit down.
So that's why we're going to meet. Okay. Sounds good.
All right. Items of interest or guidance from Planning Commission. We'll start with Commissioner DeRoche. Anything else you want to discuss?
Excellent tonight, thank you. It's all about boiling the ocean. You do a good job with that. Thanks.
Commissioner Driscoll?
I just wanted to pitch for the parks and the open space, that the more of it we have, the better, and not having everything for a specific use, like this is for soccer fields, this is a baseball pitch, like, no, just some green space with trees and foliage that people can hang out in is something we don't really have here. And it would be nice to incorporate more of that, because if we're going to have to build things up, it'd be nice not to feel like we live in a concrete jungle. I mean, just my 2 cents. But thank you for tonight. You guys did a really nice job.
Thank you. Commissioner Ellison?
Yeah, tonight was great. I was just curious. I know my term is coming towards an end as a planning commissioner, and I was just curious if you guys knew when exactly that was, because I don't.
I will.
If someone wanted to email me.
Let me check with that, and I'll work with Maya. So if you'd like to continue, I'd love to have you. So just.
It's also on the website, the city website
Yeah, I
shows
think
when our terms end.
it is there, so just,
Oh, okay, great,
Yeah.
perfect.
but yeah,
I'll check it out.
so, I can follow back up though, if that's, if you're wanting to continue, that would be part of that
I
process.
don't think I will be able to, unfortunately, because I just have got too much going on in my schedule right now. But that's what I was curious about, because it sounds like we're missing the next couple, and will resume on June 9th. But I think right around June, if I'm remembering correctly, is my 2-year mark. So I don't want, if this is my last time, seeing everyone,
Sure.
I want to be able to say goodbye.
Let me circle back with you on that. Hopefully this is not your last, because
Yeah.
I'd like to recognize you. Had not figured that this was your last meeting, but.
Sure. I think I need to get through June, but I was hoping to
Okay.
confirm.
Yeah.
All right. Commissioner Llewellyn, any final thoughts before we close out?
Nope, I'm good.
All right. Commissioner Hutchinson?
Nothing for me, thank you.
Okay. With that, and I'm pretty certain it won't be Commissioner Ellison's last meeting, but we'll double check. But if it is, it was nice knowing you. Thank you for your service. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, we'll definitely follow up with that.
Yep.
Okay. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Bye.
And the nays are 0. We are adjourned. Thank you.